Welcome to the State of the Nation. I'm your host, Mike Sham. Returning, we have the chairperson of Action SA, Michael Beaumont, back again. Michael, welcome back to the State of the Nation. Good to see you.
Thank you very much. It's good to be back. Still under a lot of load shedding, but at least a bit cooler this time.
Yeah. We were here in a heat wave when Michael was here last. It was about 30 degrees in our studio and load shedding. So we have to fight the good fight sometimes.
Yes.
But for the brief moment, we've got electricity. So let's talk quickly. You never know how long it'll last,
Yeah.
Michael, I just thought that today what we're going to do is just talk about the progress of Action SA. We understand that there's a coalition discussion. We'll get into that. But I think Action SA certainly been doing a lot of work, getting a lot of column inches in all of the publications at the moment. There's something happening here. And we've been on it from the day almost that Herman Mashaba announced the formation of the party. And, we've recently interviewed not only yourself and Herman, but also Selo Lediga, who's in charge of your Limpopo region. There's something going on here.
Yeah, without any question. So, it will be understood that we emerged from a 2021 election having done relatively well, but only in 6 municipalities out of 278. And the project is to have a national footprint, and you can only do that if you are up and running in all 9 provinces. From our point of view, that's been the focus, and we've been putting in place structures across South Africa. We are up and running in all 9 provinces, and the real reality of South African politics is that you've got to do it through the hard slog. There's no silver bullet. You can't become an instant success overnight. You've got to go house to house, street to street, community to community, and there are people right now who will vote for Action SA in 2024 who haven't yet heard of us, and that is the work that we have to do every day to bring down those numbers and make people aware of what we can bring to the table. And, the work is going well in as much as people are hungry for an alternative. And that's what we're finding everywhere we go. But, I often say to people to understand the realities of South African politics is that if your policies and your manifestos are your product, your branches are your distribution network. Because while people get very excited about media coverage and, media coverage has its value, the real work in convincing most voters in South Africa is a conversation face to face like this, one at a time across the country, and in a very rural geography of our country. That's politics of the hard slog, but certainly going well, and certainly something that Action SA structures are getting better and better at.
Because I think one of the things that many of the people that are watching us today have to understand about South Africa is that we have seen recently a trend, especially in Europe, but not only, where outsiders have come into politics. They've almost come with no political base. There's been no party with branches, etc. You've seen Macron in France, and you've seen this farmers movement in the Netherlands. And these people have ascended to the top office without ever really having that structure, because you've got a first world environment where everybody is not rushing to a dusty stadium to listen to speakers. South Africa is developing, but we are still a step behind that, aren't we?
Completely. And I think there are some new political parties that are trying to follow that kind of model of doing things. And I think they're going to find that strategy to be flawed very quickly. Because as you say, in developed countries, you have a high consumption of conventional media in their consumption of political news. You have a high access to social media. The cost of data is lower. And even in a province like Gauteng, which would be by a long shot South Africa's most literate province, the reality is only 40% of people consume their information through the traditional media. So unless you've got people on the ground who are aligned to your way of thinking and capacitated with training and materials and are going and having those conversations on the ground, frankly, you aren't in the game.
Yeah. And, certainly we see it by some of there's been a couple of enthusiastic newcomers. We'll put you ahead of that queue because, relatively speaking, you guys are newcomers in as much as you haven't stood in elections, general elections before this. And as you say, in 2021, you didn't even have full coverage in Gauteng. It was quite a rush job that turned out to be quite successful. But, and there were a lot of people saying that there's no ways that you guys were going to be able to roll this out. There was a lot of skepticism about whether Action SA will do the hard yards in building this whole framework that you do. How far would you say you are with the building of the framework?
Well, I think firstly, the skepticism is understandable. I mean, South Africans have been let down. They've been given hope to believe in a new organisation from time to time. And, in real terms, the political establishment hasn't served South Africans of any kind very well. And the graveyard of new political parties is filled with tombstones from recent history. But from our point of view, I think the work is going very well. We are finding South Africans on the ground very amenable to our message. It's always a challenge about the time available between elections and your ability to reach the very disparate geography of our country. But certainly the work is going well. Our structures are engaging in that project. They are growing every day. And you can tell a lot about the health of an organization by the vibrancy of its structures. And from our point of view, I think our branches demonstrate a party that is growing very rapidly.
Because it seems like the two biggest parties in the country seem to have almost given up on this kind of energy, right? It's seemingly, there seems to be no energy in the ANC, not even to govern. I don't know when last a decision's been made or a needle's been moved in South Africa. So, and we're not getting onto their performance just yet. We will soon, because it affects everybody that's watching this. But it seems to me that politically, they are hankered down. They're not exactly out there in stadiums giving meetings or whatever it is that they used to do. And then, of course, your former home, the DA, seems to be doing very little of this kind of campaigning out in areas other than, they're very active in media, but not necessarily getting out there to build their franchise outside of the areas where they've got a foothold already.
Certainly. I mean, I would go further to say that I think the EFF has joined the ranks of the other two in being ineffective, and they have started to stagnate. The EFF has gotten smaller in the 2021 local government elections in places like Gauteng and other provinces. And we're seeing that the sentiment of most South Africans towards the three established parties is not good. Obviously, the sentiment towards the ANC, is declining rapidly by virtue of their performance in government. And I think, as you correctly say, they've almost gone into survival mode where, it's about dealing with their internal issues and trying to hold it all together at the expense of any kind of engagement with South Africans that would lend confidence in the future of that project. But certainly when it comes to the DA and the EFF, we're seeing two parties that I think South Africans are seeing more and more are not what they promised to be. They promised to be an alternative. They promised to be growing to challenge the ANC. Neither of them are doing that. In the case of the DA, they kind of moved to kind of out the Freedom Front, and have lost on that project of diversity. And now you've got the EFF, who actually in both parties talking about possible coalition with the ANC. And I think their supporters are sitting there saying, but hang on, we're a bit confused. That's not what we signed up for when you brought us on board. So from that point of view, certainly I think a lot of South Africans are very confused about what's going on at the so-called top of the political pyramid.
Because it appears to me that the EFF has a bit of a Julius Malema problem. When you've got somebody that can work a room or a stadium as well as he does, he's got a hell of a presence. The problem is that I only want to go to an EFF event if Julius Malema is speaking, right? And that seems to be the problem that they have. Similarly, the ANC used to have that in that Zuma could certainly work a room. And now you've got Ramaphosa, and he seems to be too scared to even speak to his cabinet colleagues.
Yeah, and certainly what he's saying in any particular room depends on who's in the room. And you can have two completely different conversations depending on who the audience is. But certainly I think the EFF has got a challenge that we're very mindful of in Action SA, in as much as the EFF launched 10 years ago this year, and they're still a party of one leader, effectively. And that's not a model that we want to follow. Admittedly, I mean, we're a much younger party. We still have more work to do to ensure that we can diversify and deepen our leadership pool. But we don't want to be a party 10 years from now where it's Herman and nobody else. And I think that's a project that we are seized by. I know Herman personally is seized by that project. And if we are going to be effective in 9 provinces, we've got to put forward credible people, all of whom are leaders in their own right, all of which have strong voices in the party, and prevent a scenario where you have one person around which the entire party has a gravitational pull.
Yes.
And from our point of view, that's important.
Because you do run the risk, because Herman Mashaba is such a well-known person. He has been so clear. He has been accessible. He may not have the same sort of presence, on a stage as Julius Malema, but he did very rapidly become the face of the party. You also, at some point, need to move beyond Herman, and I think on this very platform, he has admitted that.
Without any question, and I think Herman will actually be the first one to tell you, and to offer you an insight that I don't think many people get towards, like the inner thinking of Action SA and Herman Mashaba. Herman didn't start Action SA because his life ambition was to lead a political party. Herman describes this as a job you only give to someone you hate. The reality is he believes it's a job that's necessary. And I think what's so unique from our point of view compared to political leaders I've worked with before is most political leaders are seized with insecurity. They want to surround themselves with people who don't threaten them, because if they feel threatened, that's bad. So they must have an echo chamber of weak people who tell them what they think is right all the time. And here you have someone who is not a career politician, doesn't live on what he's going to be in the future in politics, actually wants to see the ANC removed, and is happy to build the strongest team of people around him, even if that means we're going to fight, we're going to argue, and we're going to come to robust decisions that are ultimately better for the organization and better for the country. And for me, that is quite unique in the political environment that I've been used to.
Yeah. I mean, this reached its pinnacle with the IFP having an argument about having a 90-something-year-old Mangosuthu Buthelezi on the T-shirts. I mean, his face. I mean, at some point, a party like that, who stands to gain a lot, needs to move on.
Look, the one thing I will say, because we are very close with the IFP for what it's worth. We govern in coalition with them. I actually want to say, in their defense, they've been a rock in coalition. Yeah. You can depend on them. They're always at the table. They're always constructive at the table. And let's be clear, I mean, in KZN, they are doing the Lord's work. They are winning vote from the ANC, which is going to be critical for the point of view of removing the ANC in that province, which is now plausible with the help of other parties like Action SA as well. But also, KZN is the second largest province in South Africa, contributes a huge portion of the national voters roll. And the work they're doing is important. And I think the leader of the IFP has done hugely impressive work to revitalize that organization that at one time was declining very rapidly.
Yeah, and that's what makes the whole sort of current minor discussion kerfuffle around IFP and some of the old guard wanting to keep Buthelezi on the T-shirts is a little bit out of place with the new IFP that looks a bit energized and a little bit more... they probably look more useful than they've looked ever, to be honest. I mean, I really do think that they look like a hell of a power for good in this country. You come from KZN. And, if anybody has been paying attention, the IFP have been absolutely smashing. For starters, the ANC, but most certainly devastated the EFF in KZN. I mean, people aren't just voting for them because it's a different lot of letters.
No, without any question. And I think, I'm not going to get stuck in the IFP's internal politics. I don't understand it very well. Being from an outside perspective, what I can say is what you're observing, that they are doing very well. And they are critical to the progress of that province.
Yep.
And they are critical to our ability to provide change in 2024 at a national level. Right. They've been an incredible coalition partner. They've been at the table, like I said, reliably, always to be counted upon. And I think we see ourselves working very closely with the IFP. I mean, already Action SA has broken out into by-elections in KZN. We fought our first by-election in Nongoma, which is about rural KZN as you can get. And Action SA got 10% in our first showing in that province. I mean, you make the point about the EFF got 0.8%.
Yeah.
And, even Action SA beating the ANC in some voting stations, which... if Action SA and the IFP can work closely together with other parties, the things that are possible in KZN and rural KZN particularly will be very exciting for this country and for the people of that province.
So let's jump straight into the poison chalice argument of the coalitions, because it is important and has to be spoken to. But I'd like to talk about the bigger picture, because obviously the smaller picture is very ugly and dispiriting for all of us. What went on here in Johannesburg, There seems to be all kinds of issues at play, and we'll go into it soon. But let's just talk a bigger picture of the coalitions. And, I think we can kind of give up on good governance between now and I know this would offend you. I'm not saying let's give up on good governance between now and the election, but we'd almost forego that if we knew that the outcome of the general election was going to be better. But there is something happening here, right? We can't be blind to it. In South Africa, you've roughly got, well, not roughly, we've got the EFF, and I got a feeling they've sort of run quickly to the ANC as their lot has got worse in every by-election around the country, not just in KZN. And now suddenly they're making this very cozy alliance that seems to now be almost cemented in there. And typical of the EFF, they've gone into alliance with the ANC, but then every statement, Julius Malema has a go at the ANC. But let's start with them. Do you see that coalition holding?
I don't. And I think we're already seeing it happening at a local level. So they don't trust one another. That's why the ANC won't put in an EFF mayor in Ekurhuleni, and the EFF won't put in an ANC mayor in Joburg. And despite the ANC itself resolving that if they are the larger party, they must be the mayor, you now have a situation where both parties are putting forward these proxy mayors from small little parties, people no one's ever heard of before, people who carte blanche show us were vetted by mothers, and then we get these discoveries and skeletons in their closets, which really shock people, because really by the time you become mayor of Joburg, you should have been vetted by public scrutiny in your career up until that point. But I think it is going to fall apart. It's already falling apart because this is now a second mayor that's going to be an embarrassment to them. But also I think nationally we're starting to see more and more people in the ANC who are embarrassed by what is going on in Gauteng.
Can I stop you there, Michael? I want to see one person in the ANC who's embarrassed about anything.
I'll challenge you back to say embarrassed on issues of self-interest.
Okay.
Not embarrassed on governance failures, that I think is developed a fairly thick skin by now, but certainly as it relates to, blowback on their own reputation by virtue of continuing to give mayors to the biggest platform on local government, let's call it what it is. It's a very important city, and awarding it to people that continue to embarrass them. And I think that's going to continue to harm them. And I think there are people in the ANC nationally saying, we don't buy into this project with the ANC.
Yeah.
So, EFF.
And you've got the situation, there's many facets to this problem, isn't there? Because one of the facets is that we can be critical of many facets of the EFF, but many of their people seem to be prepared to do the work. And it doesn't look like I'm seeing that same level of attitude towards doing the work from anybody in the ANC. So they're in coalition. You don't see anybody from the ANC ever.
I think the EFF is desperate for a governance platform. They experimented with supporting DA coalitions in the 2016 term of office. And I think they very rapidly found that it's not good enough to be at arm's length, because you can't claim service delivery successes of a mayor you're supporting. You need to be the mayor or the MMC to be able to own those successes. But I think they've now looked at this arrangement saying they don't want to be a bridesmaid anymore. They want to be a bride. And the ANC was the only party willing to offer him that platform.
Now, part of the other problem, as I see it, and be interested to know, is that it seems like often when the EFF do the right thing or get into these positions and try their best. We saw it with some of the Scopa hearings, where the EFF member of parliament was probably one of the most effective members of that particular oversight committee. It's at odds with what the party espouses as their policies, because there's only one way to run a city right. I mean, we've seen recently Kenny Kunene, acting mayor, walking in, being very muscular about immigrants and illegal occupation, etc., etc. There's only one way to run a city, and that's correctly. You apply the bylaws, apply the laws, and over time the city is going to improve. Don't steal the money. These are very basic things, but very different to what Julius Malema would say on a stage.
Yeah, I think there are some inherent contradictions in that organisation. We see it all the time. And an organisation that was once willing to be an alternative to the ANC, that was willing to lend their support to alternatives to the ANC, has now thrown their lot in with the ANC, which, I think from a particular point of view must be very disappointing to many of their supporters, because what we have found with a lot of EFF supporters is I don't think most of their supporters are Marxist Leninists who buy into this crazy rhetoric that the EFF put forward. I think many EFF supporters saw the EFF as the biggest stick to beat the ANC, which they provided in Parliament and other places for many years. But I think with the EFF now throwing their lot in with the ANC, there's a huge amount of confusion about what's going on. And I think there's a lot of EFF supporters that are looking for a new political home.
Yeah, I must admit, I did sort of, I was watching the optics of Kenny Kunene, doing what he was doing with the EFF MMC next to him and saying, in essence, you're fighting to protect property rights, but your party says no property rights. So, there are unbelievable contradictions which will really be unearthed if they ever get to any position of power.
Well, let's go back one further step. If you want to deal with the contradictions here, of which there's a wealth of opportunity, is that the EFF leader himself has stood up and said, there are no borders.
Yes.
He has said to people of other countries, come to South Africa by creative means, I think was his term, in the middle of the COVID lockdown, which we took issue with because we actually have a viewpoint about borders needing to be respected in a country and policed. But of great interest, you then have a party that is like the PA, that is to the extreme on the issue of illegal immigration, that is throwing people out and doing these things on television. And the EFF sitting there probably thinking, how do I reconcile my presence here in light of my leader's position? So I think it was a fascinating thing to watch, actually.
Yeah. Now, let's move across the aisle to your coalition. And obviously, we're sort of talking Joburg, but not only. Recently, when he was re-elected as leader of the DA, John Steenhuisen spoke about his moonshot pact, which... John, please, God, you can't call it a moonshot pact. It's the worst name of anything I've ever heard in my life. But the point is that the idea is that you're going to get this pact together of a whole lot of people that want the best for South Africa, and it all makes sense if you can get past the name. But there have been issues that just don't seem to make the thing work the way it should be. It seems to me that there's a real... problem that the DA would have on anybody else being in charge in their coalition. So it feels to me that their idea of a coalition is, let's have a coalition as long as you all listen to me.
Yeah, exactly. And I think let's start with the name. You're absolutely right. I mean, it's such an American Democrat kind of term.
It wasn't even good when the Americans...
It was like a JFK type thing, so it's got to have a name that firstly resonates with South Africans.
Yeah.
Because South African politics has got to be good for South Africans.
Yeah.
And I think that name is not there. So firstly, on that point, we agree. I think, let me say in John's defense that the idea is a good one. And I say that because a number of us have been working on this for quite some time before the DA announced that. But it's good that they came on board at that moment. And who announced it, etc., secondary to the project. The project has got to be orientated around this principle that 2024 is a change election. It's a referendum on change. So parties that align with the ANC, to a lesser or greater extent, are aligning around a continuation or an acceleration of the status quo, because that's what alignment with the ANC promises. Whereas parties that align together to provide an alternative are aligning around the concept of change, which, if you look at South African politics, is a very promising point when market research is showing that 85% of South Africans believe the country is moving in the wrong direction, and 65% of ANC supporters believe the country is moving in the wrong direction. So it's the right alignment for us to be in. And in many ways, what was announced with that pact is good. It's the right thinking, because to provide an alternative is to provide the missing part of the equation where South Africans know the ANC is the problem. You don't need to keep telling them. South Africans know they're going to fall below 50 in 2024. The missing piece of the equation is something to look at and say, I can believe in that. Because if you do that, you animate a lot of people in this country, in fact 24 million people relative to the 12 million who did vote, 24 million people who've checked out of the political system. And if you animate those people, the result is going to be a massive change outcome in South Africa. But it requires parties to work together. And if you'll just indulge me for a moment, This is why what happened in Joburg was so bad, because in an ideal world, you would want that Joburg scenario to come up 6 months from your announcement so you've had time to pull it together.
Yeah.
But the ideal world and the real world are seldom in the same solar system.
Yes.
So now you've got a situation where 2 weeks after the announcement, there's this real world practical scenario of an actual ANC and EFF government, not a theoretical one,
Yes.
in the biggest local government platform in South Africa, with all due respect to all others, and the opportunity to show that we mean business. And at that moment, when the DA has the opportunity to choose between a coalition partner or the ANC and EFF's return through a proxy mayor, they choose the latter. And that is why a lot of parties in the Moonshot Pact, we will get another word, are saying to the DA, how do we reconcile these two things? Because they're at odds with one another, and it shoots holes in the hull of this entire concept.
There is one area that as an observer, it seems that part of the biggest part of the problem, it seems, has been the Patriotic Alliance, where it seems like the Patriotic Alliance are not so much kingmakers as just troublemakers. Right? It seems like there is no doing a deal with them. This is as an observer, right? It seems like whatever deal you do with them is going to end up being turned upside down, I want of a better word. They are just disingenuous partners. They say one thing and do another.
So let me say this, because I have a mixed view on this.
Yes.
On the first hand, I think it's correct to say that the PA has brought a degree of instability into coalitions. And in many ways, their decision around who to align with can be a product of how they feel they are being treated, which is obviously their prerogative to determine how they align in coalitions. From an Action SA standpoint, we think that we need to look at what residents want us to do as more important than how we feel we're being treated. And if someone's being nasty to us, then we'll sort it out in the corridors with them. Yeah. But our alignment should be a product of what residents need us to do. And I think that's the issue I take with the PA's approach. Where I disagree, though, is the following, is that the PA have been at the table twice in the last 4 months, at the end of January and at the end of April, trying to restore a coalition majority behind that group of parties that we are all involved with. And the DA has on both occasions rejected them.
But surely there comes a time when you've just had enough of them changing the rules of the game after the game's being played, which is what they've done.
There may be, but again, where I challenge that kind of thinking, and I'll never let it go, is that's political parties deciding what they've had enough of. Where is the residents in that conversation? Is it really okay to say that it is an acceptable cost of my decision to impose this Al-Jamar mayor who was vetted by his mother on the residents of 6 million people city? Is that right? Because the DA is saying that's acceptable. We're saying it's not. Leadership to provide an alternative to the ANC doesn't always come in an opportune and convenient kind of way. It can often come in the most inconvenient and inopportune kind of way. But you've got to stand up and provide leadership for South Africans, and that's not what's happened here.
It just feels to me that and I'm not trying to in any way support what's been done as a Johannesburg resident. It's a disaster. But the one thing that I do know is that you've got to question who's being put up in a worse light here. The coalition who think it's a good idea to what Gayton McKenzie is doing is throwing his future into the hands of the EFF and the ANC, and I wouldn't want to do that. So, I'm not 100% sure that they're thinking this through. And, that this isn't going to last. I mean, soon enough, there's already enough question mark around the second Al-Jamar mayor. It's going to collapse on its ear, and then the discussion starts all over again, and then what is he going to do, flip-flop again?
Without any question, but I think the point's got to be made that Gayton McKenzie and the PA have been at the table with our group of parties twice in the last 4 months. And I think what you should
But while he was doing that, he was at the table with the other parties.
Well, he was actually in coalition with the other parties, but willing to come and talk to our side of the aisle to say, how can we restore a coalition?
Because this is the part. But waiting for the one word so that he could say no.
No, that's exactly it. In other words, to be at our side of the aisle talking about how they could restore a coalition when you're already in coalition with somebody else is not something that we should shun. And this is the part where I disagree with the DA, because a party's attitude towards you is in part informed by your attitude towards them. Now, if you've kicked the PA in the teeth twice in the last 2 months and told them to go to hell, even when a handshake deal was done to restore the majority in the coalition, is it a surprise that the PA is in with the ANC? I think to a certain extent we've got to say that it is a product of how they are being treated.
Yeah.
And I think the growing up that needs to take place on our side of the aisle, so to speak, is for parties like the DA to realize that the moonshot pact, I'm sorry, to find a better word, is not going to be achieved by a country club of tweed jacket wearing good old boys that think the way the DA does. It's actually got to be a broad church of parties that say there's a lot of stuff we can agree to disagree about, but on certain things we have to agree.
Yeah. Well, yeah, let's hope that that some kind of sanity prevails, because it seems to me that there's a couple of ways of looking at it, and in this particular, I don't think it's as clear cut all the time. I mean, gee whiz, even you've got to be tired of the PA's demands.
We are growing very wary of the entire exercise of coalition projects at a local level. It's been strenuous, and let's agree. However, I feel let's sympathise with the residents of these municipalities who, have gone through I don't know how many mayors in the last couple of years, and they want leadership in a city that has got deep, deep challenges that they live with every day. So sympathies to them before sympathies to me. But I do want to say the following, because coalition is getting a very bad rap, and quite understandably, from people who are looking at this saying, I don't want to import this into the management of our economy. But in anything that is new, people appreciate in a business sense there's a forming, storming, and norming phase. And it's very clear which of those three we're in right now.
Yeah.
But there is going to be a norming, because more and more I think political parties are realizing that they will be judged not just on their policies and their track record in government and their leaders, but on their ability to play as part of a team sport. And if parties can't play as part of a team sport, I think voters are going to respond to that in 2024. And ultimately, the one thing I believe political parties will do is respond in their own self-interest.
Okay, so let's talk about those policies, because that's starting to loom large.
Yeah.
The clock is ticking. Action SA, you guys have, as we said at the start, you've done a lot of work. Now, as a long-suffering resident of Johannesburg, let's use that as an example because we've said Johannesburg so much. Yes, you've got the goings-on over the mayoralty, but it all pales into insignificance while we've got a country that has the electricity problems that we've got, that has got no sort of economic policy, that a country where the economy cannot grow because we don't even have power to sustain the current economy, right? Now, so in a way, the argument that's going on in Johannesburg becomes moot, because it feels to me like even if you had the best mayor in the world, there's not a hell of a lot you can do when the power's off for half the day.
Yes and no. So, I mean, I've been in that mayor's office when Herman was mayor, and I maintain that you can do more in one day in government than you can do in a lifetime in opposition. So I think there's still a lot that can be done, but I fully agree with the idea that you cannot fix local government until you fix certain problems nationally, because local government is being killed by Eskom.
Yes.
These double-digit increases are killing the ability of cities to fund themselves. It's being killed by issues like crime, which is fundamentally a product of national government. It's being killed by issues like infrastructure. I mean, our rail collapse. If you see what's happening to small towns with trucks destroying the roads because the rail network have collapsed, there's just so many examples where local government is being killed by national government. And there's no question you've got to get national government right to enable local government to really come right in a big way.
So now you guys have started to sharpen up your policy, the policies that you're going to carry into the election. Share some of them with us.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think the first thing is I can't share the policies because those have to be the product of a process.
Yes.
But what I can say is that we've got a policy conference that will take place between the 12th and the 14th of September. It's going to involve hundreds of delegates from Action SA from around the country convening in one location, and panel beating what will ultimately be our offer to the South African people. But we have determined that this process must be fundamentally different, because when I say policy, I think your viewers right now, their eyes are glazing over saying, policy. Yeah. We want to produce something that's fundamentally different, because the opposition policy space has been paralysis of analysis. It's been ongoing, crime is bad, load shedding is bad. Everyone knows those things are bad. What they want is serious solutions to serious challenges. And that's the space that we want to play in. So we are even going to the point of convening groups of South Africans such that when we talk about crime, we want policemen and women, detectives, private security experts, judges and prosecutors around a table to say, how do we fix this problem? Because the minute you put those kind of people around who know the challenges of the industry, they know the answers, they're just not in politics and no one's given them a platform, ultimately the policies we bring to that conference in September is going to be informed by real solutions. It's not going to be ideological, it's not going to be navel gazing. It's going to show South Africans that we can fix our country and animate them around that idea. And from our point of view, we're really excited because we think this is going to be a bit of a game changer in the political space.
Because obviously up until now, when people ask opposition parties, what is your policies? The answer is kind of, what does it matter? You're going to go to Parliament and there's no ways the ANC would look at anybody else's policies other than their own.
Well, that's part of the problem with the opposition space, isn't it? Because our opposition parties fundamentally lack ambition. They are happy to be in opposition in perpetuity. Now, I mean, there's no point of a policy if you're going to be in opposition.
Yes.
Policies matter when you get into government so you can change things. And I think that's the point that we need to get to, so that when we come together, and let's bring it back to that discussion around, this group of parties, I'm not going to call it by its name, that talk about these things, is that we need to actually come together and say, can we agree on a solution to load shedding together? Because actually load shedding is not ideological.
Yes.
A power mix is not ideological. Can we talk about this? And I think automatically, just off the top of the head, you can start to put down some very serious challenges in South Africa around which many political parties can agree on the solutions.
Yeah. Now, there's going to be one big policy that's going to dominate whatever emerges from September. And I've sat down with Herman many times, and I know where he stands on BEE, right, which is... And that is going to get a lot of blowback by a lot of people, where I think your policy is going to be in line with what has been mentioned before from Action SA, where you guys have not been in favor of race-based policies. Now, I know we've got two white guys talking about it, but this is going to be contentious, isn't it? And some of the opposition, the other parties looking for votes, are going to pick you up on it.
Oh, yes.
Dramatically.
It's one of the things that when you walk the centrist line in South African politics, you get rocks thrown at you from the left and you get rocks from the right. And that's okay. Because if you're walking the center line, you're walking with most South Africans, actually, and that's the space we want to occupy. People who want to say that BEE and affirmative action are policies that are popular, I dare them to go into many communities of this country and use those words. Because actually you'll find many people who were meant to benefit from those policies and who didn't benefit because they just didn't have the right political connections. And that's why you won't find yourself so safe if you go around, throwing those words around so liberally. But I do want to say about those policies, there is a line we draw in this regard, is that these policies have failed. You just have to have eyes to see that. But at the same time, Action SA fundamentally believes that our country has an unjust past, and that unjust past has to be addressed. And for us to be a non-racial society, and for us to move to a stage where race is not a primary determinant of opportunity or one scope for development in life, we have to recognize that those imbalances have to be corrected. So we will be going to that policy conference deliberately with a view of laying down a real alternative. Because most political parties agree that that policy hasn't worked. Well and good. What's the alternative? And in that regard, I think we want to go where angels fear to tread, and we want to lay down what will ultimately become the first alternative to that policy in South Africa.
Now, curiously, there's some of the other parties that may slot into that pact, that this is going to be problematic to. I'm not sure where the IFP stands on this. Do you have any idea?
I am of the view that they have regarded that policy to be a fundamental failure. I think most political parties other than the ANC agree with that. But I think that ultimately they still believe that there has to be redress to those particular challenges. It's actually a very interesting question, because it's a process we're going to go through together as a group of parties. And it's going to have to be dealt with in a very frank and honest way, that we have to agree to disagree on certain things, and we have to identify where we can agree. I do think, though, that there's enough common ground around which we can align in many, many regards, much more than the stuff around which we disagree, that will ultimately help us come together.
Because that is ultimately going to be the line in the sand that separates the one pact from the other, is which one looks forward and which one looks back.
Yeah, I think so. I think from our point of view, though, our politics does differ quite fundamentally from the DA in this regard, because the DA takes an approach that they don't want to have any regard for what's behind us, which, I think is generally a viewpoint of those who are fortunate enough not to live with what was behind us. And from our point of view, we also believe that you cannot achieve a truly just and balanced society unless you've addressed those past imbalances. You can't be non-racial as long as the difference between those who have and those who have not are so racially polarized in South Africa. And I think that is one of the perspectives we have, but where we fully agree is there's got to be a forward-looking program of redressing these issues and not just simply talking about the past, but actually acting upon it.
Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. One of the options for next year's general election, a party that's doing a lot of work, Action SA, getting a lot of attention, and for the right reason. Michael, thank you so much for making yourself available as always. To everybody that joined us today, I hope that you've enjoyed this. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and if you're really feeling excited about what we're doing, become part of our supporters club and get some interesting perks. But Michael Beaumont, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been wonderful, and we'll get you again. Thank you so much.
Always look forward to it.
Thank you.